Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take dense research, complex organizational theory, and high-stakes source material and turn it into knowledge you can actually use.
Mm,
Today, we are undertaking what I think is a truly crucial mission, a deep dive into the why of professional motivation.
right.
We're moving well beyond the theories you might have, skimmed in a college textbook and going straight into the systems that govern public sector behavior.
That's right. Our focus today is Clayton Aldifer's ERG theory, which he formulated back in 1969.
ERG.
Now, if you studied management or psychology, you've definitely heard of Maslow. But we're going to argue today that ERG theory isn't just a simple update.
Okay.
It is arguably the most powerful diagnostic tool we have for truly understanding complex motivation,
Yeah.
especially inside these rigid, high-stakes organizations like government, the civil services, and, any large bureaucracy.
And our mission today is it's much bigger than just defining three letters. We're going to use ERG to try and solve some really persistent administrative puzzles.
Yeah, the big ones.
Exactly. Like, how do we explain things like bureaucratic apathy or this idea of goal displacement and even the structural roots of systemic corruption?
Right.
Why does a highly motivated, idealistic public servant, someone who literally joined the service to change the world, sometimes end up, obsessing only about their official car or their housing allowance or just minimizing their own effort?
And ERG gives us a really nuanced structural answer to that. It moves the focus away from just, individual moral failure and puts it on organizational design failure.
Okay, so it's the system, not just the person.
Precisely. Maslow gave us this beautiful foundational concept, that five-step pyramid. We all know it. But that model was just too sequential, too rigid for the messy reality of professional life.
Where you're worrying about everything at once.
Exactly. You're worrying about paying your mortgage and trying to launch a major policy initiative at the same time. Aldifer's ERG theory is the essential refinement. It's more fluid, it's more realistic, and crucially, it's far more applicable when we look at the contradictory pressures faced by people in public administration.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So Aldifer didn't just, rename a few things. He actually synthesized them based on empirical data he collected in real organizations.
That's the key. This came from the field.
He took Maslow's 5 needs, physiological, safety, social, esteem, self-actualization, and he condensed them. So what are these 3 broader, more pragmatic zones of motivation?
So we have the 3 categories: existence, relatedness, and growth.
ERG.
ERG.
And the synthesis is brilliant because it groups the needs based on their fundamental nature. Is it material, is it relational, or is it about your own development?
Okay, so let's start at the base, the material foundation. That would be E, existence needs. What does that actually cover?
Existence needs are all about the material and physical requirements for survival and, well-being. This is your foundation. It's your basic life support system within the job. So mapping this back to Maslow.
It maps perfectly onto his most foundational needs.
Yeah.
So you have the physiological needs, air, food, basic comforts, and the safety and security needs.
Which in a job context is more than just physical safety.
Oh, absolutely. More importantly, it means financial security, job stability, a safe working environment. It's all about being anchored and secure in your position.
It's pretty simple. If an organization isn't meeting my existence needs, my focus is going to be on survival, not on, service or innovation.
You're not thinking about the big picture. You're thinking about your next paycheck.
That's clear. Okay, so moving up from there, we get to R, relatedness needs. This sounds like the human element.
Absolutely. Relatedness is the desire for maintaining important interpersonal relationships. It's that need for human connection, for acceptance, social validation.
And in his condensation, how does that map to Maslow?
So relatedness captures Maslow's social needs, so belonging, friendship, affection. But it also cleverly pulls in the external esteem needs.
External esteem. That's about how other people see you, right? Your status, the recognition you get from your peers.
Exactly. It's about how you fit into the professional group, how your cadre validates you, the recognition you get from your superiors and even from the public.
So it's about belonging and status.
Yes. If existence is, do I have enough money to live? Relatedness is, do I belong here? And do the people here value me?
And then at the very top, where I guess true fulfillment lies, we find G, growth needs.
Right. Growth needs represent that intrinsic internal desire for personal development, for creativity, for being deeply productive and making a meaningful contribution that aligns with your potential. This is really the engine of idealism.
So in Maslow's terms, this is the top of the pyramid.
It combines the internal esteem needs, so self-respect, competence, mastery, achievement, with that highest level, self-actualization.
This is the drive to be your best self professionally.
The drive toward innovation, self-improvement, and, reaching your full professional capacity.
So we have E, R, and G. But you said the real magic, where ERG truly separates itself from Maslow, is in the structure.
Yes.
Maslow had this rigid staircase, right? You couldn't climb to esteem if your safety needs were under threat. You had to finish one level before the next one even mattered.
A very rigid hierarchy.
So what did Alder first see about motivation that let him just throw out that ladder?
He recognized that the psychological reality for professionals is, well, it's messy. It's not linear.
Yeah.
So he replaced that rigid ladder with a flexible continuum. And this is the game changer, especially for understanding modern work.
A flexible continuum. That implies you can be moving across all three at any time.
Precisely. He introduced this concept of simultaneity. This means that unlike Maslow's model, where you're sort of blocked until a lower level is satisfied, ERG says an individual can be actively pursuing all three needs at once.
Okay, so you don't have to wait for your pension to be fully vested. Your E need to be satisfied before you can start looking for a really high-impact, challenging project. A G need.
Exactly. You're doing both at the same time.
That just feels so much more true to life. I mean, think about any high-performing person in their late 20s. They're intensely motivated, right? They're worried about securing their first apartment or getting a good salary bump. That's E. But they are simultaneously deeply committed to working with their team, that's R, and finding a project where they can actually innovate and solve a real social challenge. That's G.
Exactly. Maslow's theory would really struggle to explain that powerful dual pull. ERG handles it beautifully. It recognizes that the complexity of our professional drivers requires a model where a threat in one area doesn't just shut down ambition in another.
So the ability to seek security and fulfillment at the very same time.
That is the structural foundation that makes ERGA just a far superior diagnostic tool for the public sector.
Okay, so if the three categories are the gears of the machine, then these two movement mechanisms must be the engine. Let's start with the familiar one first, that upward drive.
All right, that's mechanism one, satisfaction progression. This is the positive path, the one that's conceptually shared with Maslow.
Okay.
It simply says that as a lower level need gets satisfied, or as you feel successful in fulfilling it, the desire or the pull toward the next higher level need gets stronger.
So once a civil servant gets to a point of financial comfort and job security, their E is satisfied. The motivation naturally shifts. They start looking for recognition from their peers, forming strong alliances, focusing on R.
And once R is stable, what's left?
The primary drive becomes about policy influence and real impact. It becomes about G.
Yes. This explains that positive forward movement in a career. You see it all the time. A senior bureaucrat who has tenure, a stable salary, they're well regarded. They often find their deepest satisfaction comes only from tackling these huge existential problems.
Like infrastructure planning or educational reform.
Exactly. They're seeking G because their E and their R are stable. They're taken care of.
But Alderfer's real insight, the thing that explains all the cynicism and systemic problems in organizations, is the downward mechanism.
Yes.
Mechanism 2, frustration regression. You said this is what really sets ERG apart and makes it so valuable for administrative science.
This is the major contribution, and it's absolutely essential to understanding the negative dynamics within any large system.
Okay, so what is the principle?
The frustration regression principle states that when a higher level need is chronically suppressed or blocked or unsatisfied, when it's frustrated, the individual doesn't just give up.
Right.
They mentally and professionally regress to a lower level need, and they intensify their effort, sometimes pathologically, to satisfy that lower need instead.
So they're looking for psychological compensation.
Perfect way to put it.
If I can't achieve meaning in my work, I will try desperately to achieve comfort or status somewhere else. It's an act of psychological displacement, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's classic displacement behavior. The energy and ambition that was originally aimed at, say, solving a complex policy problem on you need it, gets displaced.
Where does it go?
It goes on to something achievable, even if it's a lesser material or purely internal goal, an E or an R need.
So if the system structurally denies me the ability to be a policy reformer,
Then you might instead focus on being the person who makes sure they get their official accommodation fully renovated every 2 years, or who meticulously, maintains their internal departmental status.
Let's apply this directly. Let's talk about the ultimate rigid structure, the bureaucratic trap scenario. Why is bureaucracy inherently threatening to our growth needs?
Well, to understand the trap, we just need a quick reminder of the ideal structure of the Weberian model of bureaucracy.
Okay.
This model still governs many civil services. Max Weber's ideal was defined by hierarchy, specialization, rule-bound operations, impersonality.
All things that sound like the opposite of creativity.
Exactly. They're fantastic for stability, for predictability, for efficiency. But these structures are fundamentally designed to minimize individual autonomy and creativity.
Because bureaucracy is designed to execute policy neutrally, not to invent it on the fly.
Precisely. Hierarchy and red tape mean your autonomy is low. Specialization means you only handle a tiny, constrained piece of a problem, which frustrates the desire for holistic impact.
And rule-bound operations stifle creativity and any kind of risk-taking.
So the traditional bureaucratic structure constantly serves as a systemic roadblock to those high-growth needs, to G.
So let's play it out. A highly motivated officer enters the service with high G. They want to solve complex problems, but the system subjects them to, 3 years of political interference.
5 years of paralyzing red tape.
And 10 years of being told, that's not how we do things here.
They become frustrated, chronically frustrated.
So what does that regression actually look like in practice?
Well, first it can manifest as a regression to relatedness. The officer realizes that their impactful work, their G need, is just impossible.
So they redirect their ambition.
They redirect it internally. They shift their focus away from external results like public welfare and entirely toward navigating the internal social landscape.
So they substitute policy achievement for political achievement inside the office.
Exactly. And this leads to an intense focus on office politics, securing advantageous postings, hoarding information, the strategic accumulation of social capital.
They're seeking validation and control, but only within their peer group.
Exclusively. They might become obsessed with service association activities or union politics, not because they even believe in the mandate, but because it's a tangible arena where they can exercise power and achieve recognized status.
That's the R need.
It's pure R, compensating for the lack of meaningful policy output, which is G.
That explains so much. It explains why senior officers can become so intensely involved in these, frankly, trivial internal turf wars, doesn't it?
It does.
It's a low-stakes achievement that fulfills a displaced high-stakes ambition.
It is. And then there's the second, often more destructive regression, the regression to existence, E. When G is deeply chronically blocked, and even R becomes unsatisfyingly petty, the officer retreats all the way down to the foundational material needs. They can become pathologically obsessed with security and perks.
We mentioned the car and the bungalow earlier. How does that obsession show up beyond just wanting nice things?
It becomes an obsession with comparative status, defined purely by material markers that the state provides.
So it's not just wanting a nice car?
It's needing the specific model that's allotted to your rank. It's making sure your official residence is larger and better maintained than your peers.
Wow.
It's that intense, sometimes ridiculous focus on perquisites, like securing a specific corner office or fighting tooth and nail over travel allowances.
These are all tangible, achievable metrics of security and status.
Yes, and they compensate for the intangible, unachievable metrics of policy impact.
And this brings us right back to the theory's power in diagnosing corruption. You're arguing that corruption isn't always driven by a primary need for more money, but sometimes it's the result of a frustrated need for meaning.
That is the core powerful thesis from the sources. When the system structurally fails to allow the fulfillment of growth needs, autonomy, policy impact, achievement, the psychological pressure to achieve something manifests as a compensatory focus on material security and accumulation.
That's E.
Pure E. Corruption in this context is often a structural symptom. The officer displaces their thwarted professional ambition, their G, with a new, achievable material ambition, which is E.
Okay, before we move on, I have to challenge this a little.
Please.
Doesn't this sound like we're letting inherently lazy or greedy people off the hook by just blaming the system? I mean, some people are just driven by self-interest regardless of the organization.
That's a vital, critical point.
Yeah.
And ERG doesn't negate individual self-interest or, moral choice.
Yeah.
It doesn't give anyone a free pass.
So what does it do?
What it provides is a framework for understanding how structure multiplies negative behavior.
Oh.
So while some individuals may be inherently corrupt, ERG explains why a large pool of initially idealistic, honest people, the vast majority who join, can end up contributing to systemic apathy or small-scale corruption, like misusing resources or just chronic inefficiency.
Because the system pushes them that way.
When the system consistently rewards rule following, which is an E need, and it punishes risk-taking or innovation, a G need, it actively selects for regression.
So it's not that ERG excuses greed.
It's that it explains why a functional organization can inadvertently create the conditions for this displacement behavior. It pushes officers toward E and R fulfillment when G is systemically blocked.
So the system is, in a way, self-sabotaging. It takes all this idealistic energy and converts it into these compensatory defensive behaviors.
Precisely. And that retreat into rule following is what defines bureaucratic apathy, or what we call goal displacement. When the primary public service goal, G, is swapped for the secondary, safer goal of strict compliance, which is E.
It's because the system makes the first one impossible and the second one safe. We've established the theoretical engine. Now let's drill down into the practical application. Let's use the high-stakes environment of public administration, focusing on examples you see in meritocratic bureaucracies.
Okay.
Let's start with existence needs, E in PA. What does that look like on the ground?
The material anchors of a government job are what define E. So this includes the predictable, guaranteed salary, the robust pension scheme, government housing, and crucially, security of tenure and the predictable nature of working conditions.
And we can see in the recruitment phase, the power of E is just massive, especially in these hyper-competitive civil services around the world. Our source material points specifically to the Indian context and the intensity of demand for the UPSC exam.
And that demand is a direct measure of the high value placed on existence needs in that environment.
Right.
This civil service, unlike the often turbulent private sector, offers profound security. The source cites Article 311 of the Constitution of India.
And what does that do?
It provides an unparalleled constitutional guarantee of security of tenure. This provision makes it extremely difficult for a civil servant to be summarily dismissed or arbitrarily removed.
So that security is effectively a massive institutionalized satisfaction of the safety and security needs. It's built right into the system.
Absolutely. And then you combine this constitutional protection with the periodic mandated salary increases and perks that are determined by pay commissions.
So it's predictable and it's secure.
And you have a career track that is uniquely structured to maximize existence fulfillment. For millions of people, the primary motivation to endure years of grueling preparation is this ultimate low-risk, secure professional existence.
It provides a safety net that very few other careers can match.
Exactly.
So it sets the baseline expectation for anyone entering the service, which is security. Okay, so let's move to relatedness needs in PA, the team aspect.
Relatedness involves the whole social fabric of the bureaucracy, the need for team spirit or esprit de corps, recognition from your seniors, and acceptance by your peers, that often insular circle of your cadre mates. It also includes the necessary but often stressful interaction with the public, which provides another source of recognition, good or bad.
So how does the system manage this need? We mentioned earlier that traditional rigid hierarchy can often stifle that natural collegiality.
It does. The strict formal distance that's required by hierarchy and specialization can isolate officers. It makes organic relatedness pretty difficult to achieve on the job itself.
But the system finds a way.
Oh, the system is resilient. It generates its own powerful counter-mechanisms to fulfill that need.
Which brings us back to something like the power of batch affiliation.
This is one of the most powerful, informal mechanisms for our fulfillment. Your batch, the group that enters the service in the same year as you, forms a lifelong network.
It's like a graduating class, but for life.
For life.
Yeah.
It transcends departmental silos. It transcends political transfers. It's an intense bonding mechanism that guarantees peer acceptance and a lifelong support structure. It functions as a powerful, exclusive social safety net, which intensely satisfies those R needs.
And then you have the more formal structures for R.
Yes. The service associations.
Yeah.
Things like the IAS Association or state civil service groups. These are institutionalized bodies that fulfill the need for collective representation and a shared professional identity.
So when an officer feels frustrated by the system, G-blocked, or isolated by the hierarchy,
These associations pull them back into a social fold, back into R. They provide a source of validation and collective power that they lack as an individual. These structures are crucial for understanding how professionals maintain their sanity and sense of belonging in what can be a very isolating environment.
Finally, let's look at growth needs, G, in PA, the real mission.
Growth needs in public administration are intrinsically tied to this concept of public service motivation, or PSM. This is that intrinsic, often idealistic drive to serve the public good, to influence policy, to lead complex societal change, and to feel a deep sense of achievement from your work.
This is what many people claim is their initial motivation when they decide to join the civil service in the first place.
It is. It's the ultimate driver of high performance and innovation. And modern administrative reforms are, at their core, fundamentally trying to shift the bureaucratic culture to foster this growth orientation.
The prime example being Mission Karmayogi in the Indian context. How does an initiative like that attempt to feed the G?
Mission Karmayogi is a massive, ambitious, institutional attempt to shift the focus of the entire civil service from simply being compliant to being competent and impactful.
Okay, what's the difference?
Historically, the bureaucracy valued rule-based competence. So, adhering strictly to procedures. This is rooted in existence and safety needs. The focus was on input and process.
Which, as we've discussed, is the safest thing to do when your G needs are blocked.
Exactly. Karmayogi aims to transition to role-based competence.
Yeah.
Here, the focus is on the outcome, the impact, and the mission of the role.
So it's not just about following the rules perfectly.
It's about getting the job done. It emphasizes continuous learning, developing specialized skills, and accountability for results. By defining success not just as compliance, but as the successful achievement of complex, growth-oriented missions, the system is actively trying to structure itself to satisfy the high G needs of its officers.
So it's an organizational attempt to mitigate that frustration regression trap.
Yes.
By making growth both possible and rewarded.
That's the goal.
Now we get to use ERG as a kind of scalpel to diagnose these large-scale administrative pathologies. Let's return to the structural diagnosis of corruption and goal displacement. The argument is that systemic failures are actively pushing officers toward E and R.
Right, and this structural argument needs to be reiterated with force. Corruption and apathy are often the result of an organization failing its psychological mandate.
Failing its people, basically.
Failing its people. If the system fails to provide sufficient, credible, and consistent avenues for high G fulfillment, that means policy impact, autonomy, public achievement, then employees are psychologically pushed to regress. They're forced to seek intense satisfaction in existence or relatedness instead.
So if I'm a highly idealistic bureaucrat and I try for 5 years to reform the public health system, but I'm blocked at every single turn by politics, by procedure, by inertia, that energy doesn't just vanish into thin air.
It's displaced. The drive for impact shifts into a drive for status. If I can't solve the health crisis, I can at least ensure I have maximum control over the resources in my immediate department. That's a form of material control.
And this also explains the insidious nature of bureaucratic apathy.
It does. When the officer realizes that genuine public welfare G is practically impossible to achieve, the most rational behavior is not to innovate, it's to retreat.
Retreat into what?
Into the hyper-safe, rule-bound adherence of E and R. They prioritize surviving the system, which is E, and maintaining their internal status R, over reforming the system, which is G.
They swap the goal of public service for the goal of self-preservation.
Goal displacement, that perfectly describes it. The system forces the officer to substitute the difficult high G goal with an achievable low G goal.
So they generate perfect, voluminous monthly reports instead of achieving messy policy outcomes.
They value perfect compliance over creative solutions. They're still fulfilling a need, but it's a compensatory need. It's not the original one.
That structural perspective is just so critical for any serious reformer. Let's look at the nuance here, though. What about motivation during extreme pressure? How does ERG explain extraordinary performance in a crisis? Because that often seems to defy the security-first principle.
This is where ERG's principle of simultaneity truly shines, and it proves its superiority over Maslow's sequential model.
Okay.
Take any national crisis, a major disaster, a war, or the example we used before, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. During the pandemic, the existence needs of frontline civil servants, health workers, administrators, that personal safety was under severe acute threat.
If Maslow were perfectly correct, their motivation should have collapsed. They should have focused purely on self-preservation and securing their own safety.
But that's not what happened.
Not at all. We saw immense often heroic dedication. And ERG explains this because the threat to E did not necessarily extinguish the powerful simultaneous activation of their growth needs.
The profound sense of duty, the intrinsic desire to solve this massive existential problem, and the national call to action, it just overrode the threat to their security.
Precisely. They were motivated by high growth needs,
Mm.
a sense of duty, the opportunity for intense contribution, solving a problem on a national scale. The motivation isn't sequential, it's additive.
So the fear was there, but so was the drive.
The presence of powerful G motivation provided sufficient drive to risk EERG's ability to handle these multiple conflicting needs at the same time. The fear for safety, alongside the ambition for impact, makes it essential for understanding complex human behavior in crisis management.
Okay, so if we accept ERG as the diagnostic framework, how do we operationalize the solutions? What does it suggest for specific administrative reforms in, say, personnel management?
The theory provides clear guidance. The system has to actively re-engineer itself to encourage growth and reduce the triggers for regression.
And a prime example in policy circles is the push for lateral entry.
Yes, bringing in specialized professionals from outside the traditional civil service exam pipeline.
Why do administrators champion this so much?
Because individuals who are entering laterally are typically driven by high growth needs. They're policy experts, they're industry specialists, academics. They're driven by the desire for policy impact. They want to use their specialized knowledge and face high level challenges.
And they're less motivated by the existence needs.
Exactly. The absolute security of tenure, the pension, those things are less important to them than to someone who came up through the traditional system.
So you're basically injecting G-driven people directly into an E-driven system. But what are the challenges with that reform when you look at it through an ERG lens?
The challenge is immense, and it stems from a clash of motivations. The high G lateral entrant will frequently clash with the entrenched high E and high R legacy system.
How so?
The career officer, who has often regressed because of these systemic blocks, may see the lateral entry officer's emphasis on rapid change and outcomes, their G focus, as reckless or destabilizing.
Because it threatens their hard-won security, their E, or their established internal status, their R.
Exactly. So the system might just reject the injection. The existing high E, high R structure acts like an immune system to the high G motivation. It frustrates the newcomers.
And potentially causes them to regress or just quit and go back to the private sector.
That's the risk. Successful lateral entry requires not just hiring high G people, but structurally redesigning the organization to protect their ability to achieve their growth goals. Otherwise, the system just chews them up and spits them out, validating the cynical conclusion that G fulfillment is impossible in government.
That is a critical nuance. What about training reform? We talked about shifting from rule-based to role-based competence. How does ERG guide the actual content and methodology of training?
Well, if traditional training focuses on rules, compliance, and procedure, all things rooted in existence and safety, it actively reinforces the regression cycle. It tells the officer, your success here depends on compliance, not on creativity.
So the reform needs to focus on making growth the achievable outcome.
Exactly. ERG suggests that training must incorporate elements that foster growth needs directly. This means a shift from purely lecture-based, rule recitation models to practical, project-based learning.
Get your hands dirty.
Yes. Trainees should be assessed not just on their knowledge of rules, but on their ability to solve complex, ambiguous policy problems. We need to introduce training modules that explicitly focus on impact assessment, ethical risk-taking, and a concept called failure tolerance.
Failure tolerance. That seems key because growth requires innovation, and innovation guarantees risk and, occasional failure.
If the system severely punishes all failures, it structurally blocks growth. ERG tells us that training must instill confidence in officers to take calculated risks and to frame failure as a necessary input for learning. That validates their pursuit of G.
So the goal of reform training is to make the pursuit of policy impact feel safer and more rewarded than the retreat into procedural compliance.
That's it, in a nutshell.
We've established that ERG is highly useful for public administration. So let's quickly synthesize the comparison one last time. Why is ERG just the better framework here?
In short, it better captures the structural reality of professional life. First, the structure is a flexible continuum, which allows for diverse motivations.
Right.
Second, movement is bidirectional up with progression and down with regression, which is crucial for explaining cynicism and apathy.
And third,
Simultaneity. It acknowledges that you can be driven by E, R, and G all at the same time. This sophisticated model gives administrators the tools to understand why their most ambitious officers sometimes act against the organization's best interests when they get frustrated.
Okay, but we have to acknowledge that, like all content theories, ERG has its limitations. What are the recognized flaws or difficulties that managers face when they try to apply this theory operationally?
The primary limitation is the inherent difficulty in objective measurement. How does an HR manager standardize growth?
It's subjective.
It's highly subjective.
Uh,
For one officer, growth might mean policy influence at the ministerial level. For another, it might be achieving political power. For a third, it could be deep technical mastery of a complex subject.
We can't really compare those.
These subjective definitions are really difficult for an organization to standardize, to quantify in performance reviews, or to consistently reward. So the theory is brilliant for diagnosis, but it's complex for implementation.
And what about the cultural context? Maslow was famously criticized for its Western bias, right? Positioning individual self-actualization as the ultimate human driver. Does ERG suffer from a similar cultural bias?
It does, although to a lesser degree, ERG still kind of roots itself in that paradigm where individual growth is the pinnacle. But our source material highlights a vital calibration that's needed, especially in strong collectivistic cultures, like in parts of India or East Asia, where group identity is paramount.
So what's the implication for the R category, for relatedness there?
In those cultures, the need for relatedness, peer acceptance, group harmony, strong professional ties, collective status, that might function as an extremely powerful, high-priority driver. In some cases, it can rival or even surpass purely individualistic growth needs as a motivating force for fulfillment.
So if a civil servant faces a choice between a high-impact autonomous policy role, which is G, that risks fracturing their relationship with their batchmates, which is R.
Or taking a less impactful role that guarantees social harmony and status within the cadre, which is R.
They might choose the latter, which fundamentally contradicts the idea that G is universally the highest motivator.
That is precisely the cultural calibration required. An organization operating in a collectivistic environment has to recognize that it needs to emphasize and reward. Relatedness needs just as strongly as growth needs.
So you have to frame growth in terms of the group.
You ensure that G fulfillment is often framed in terms of collective achievement and shared purpose, rather than purely individual heroics. That way you avoid frustrating the R component.
So the system must not only protect growth, but also ensure that the pursuit of growth doesn't undermine the critical relatedness needs in certain cultures. That adds another layer of complexity.
It does. But the ultimate takeaway for administrators and policymakers remains constant. ERG provides a vital roadmap for bureaucratic health. The system has a structural obligation to foster and protect those avenues for high-growth needs.
Because if it doesn't,
If systemic rigidity, red tape, political stagnation, fear of failure continuously stifles the potential for impact, the frustration is guaranteed to initiate the regression cycle.
which means the system is literally converting its most idealistic recruits into cynical box tickers or resource accumulators.
Exactly. As long as systemic friction blocks the pursuit of G, the frustration regression mechanism ensures that even the most well-intentioned officers will retreat into defensive behaviors centered on E and R fulfillment.
This deep dive into ERG theory has been absolutely vital for understanding the mechanics of professional satisfaction and, maybe more importantly, professional decay. We've successfully traded Maslow's rigid ladder for Alderfer's flexible continuum, and we've established that the immense power of ERG lies not just in explaining progression, but in diagnosing what happens when you are structurally pushed down.
We established that the frustration regression principle offers a sophisticated organizational answer to cynicism and apathy. It fundamentally shifts the diagnosis away from just individual moral failure and towards systemic structural failure.
Yeah.
The retreat toward material accumulation or existence or internal political maneuvering, relatedness, is often a necessary psychological compensation mechanism when the pursuit of professional meaning and impact, or growth, is perpetually blocked by the organization itself.
It's a profound lesson in management, really. If you hire someone for their idealism and their drive for change, but your system is designed to punish those very efforts, you have effectively built a structural machine to manufacture cynicism and displacement behavior.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. If the traditional rigid bureaucracy, with its focus on hierarchy and rule compliance, is the ultimate structure for frustrating growth needs,
Then what?
then we have to look at modern organizational trends, things like decentralized teams, agile governance, the rise of the gig economy. Are these trends fundamentally a widespread institutionalized recognition of the need to satisfy high-growth needs, which the legacy bureaucratic models simply could not accommodate?
Think about what those structures signal. They value autonomy and impact. That's G over rigid tenure and guaranteed office space, which is E. So we challenge you to look at your own organization, whether it's government, corporate, or nonprofit, and identify those specific structures, those persistent roadblocks that might be blocking your team's collective growth needs. If that G is blocked, where is that energy being displaced? Is it going into petty office politics, resource accumulation, or simply checking out? The choice to foster growth or to guarantee regression belongs to the designers of the system.